The White House says that Donald Trump will continue working from the hospital and that it's equipped to allow him to keep up with his official duties. His doctor has just said the U.S. president no longer has a fever and is doing very well. Last night, Trump tweeted from the hospital. He wrote, "Going well, I think. Thank you to all. Love." We're learning more about the president's condition, and Stephen D'Souza is going to join us now. He has the very latest. So, Stephen, we were all watching that live press conference with the president's medical team. What did we learn?
You know, a generally positive outlook for the president from his medical team as they delivered their update earlier this morning, saying that they're extremely happy with his progress, mentioning some of the symptoms that he's had since he was diagnosed late Thursday, early Friday, saying that he had a mild cough, nasal congestion, and fatigue, and that all of those are resolving, that he did have a fever Thursday night into Friday, but that he's been fever-free for the last 24 hours, and that he has not been on supplemental oxygen, which is a key point because we know how much the virus can attack the lungs. They say that looks good so far, and we know he is on 2 treatments, Regeneron, which is an antibody treatment, as well as remdesivir, and they said that they're monitoring him to see how he reacts both to the virus and to those treatments. And generally they said he feels like he's doing quite well. They said that the president even told the doctors that he feels like he could walk out of there today, but obviously the doctors are not going to let that happen because they still have a lot left to check on. The president, of course, he is over 70 years old. He is considered overweight, so he does have some risk factors, and it is still very early on in the virus, and so they want to see just how the virus manifests itself, how the treatments are working. But generally they say they're trying to advise him to stay hydrated, to stay well fed, to move around, and to keep busy. And they joked slightly that he has quite a bit of work to do on his plate. And so we heard from them that the president seems to be in good spirits. And so for a country that has gone through is going through a chaotic election campaign, now hit with the news that the president has the coronavirus, this update should come as a relief. And so we do have a little bit of a clip here from what the doctors had to say earlier. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
We have monitored his cardiac function, his kidney function, his liver function. All of those are normal. And the president this morning is not on oxygen, not having difficulty breathing or walking around the White House medical unit upstairs. He's in exceptionally good spirits, and in fact, as we were completing our multidisciplinary rounds this morning, the quote he left us with was, "I feel like I could walk out of here today," and that was a very encouraging comment from the president.
And now, Stephen, we're definitely getting a lot more reports about other people around the president being diagnosed with COVID-19. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, a big name just announced earlier today, and that is former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. And he is significant because he was part of the Trump team that helped prepare the president for the debate earlier this week in Cleveland with Joe Biden. And so he was in a room maskless with the president, now announcing on Twitter this morning that he has tested positive. He just adds to a growing list of people around the president who have tested positive in the last week. Hope Hicks, a special advisor, she was the one that really got the ball rolling on all of this. Kellyanne Conway, a special advisor. Bill Stepien, who's the Trump campaign manager. Ronna McDaniel, the Republican Party chairperson. And then 3 Republican senators, Mike Lee, Tom Tillis, Ron Johnson. Some of these individuals, not all, were at an event when Trump announced the Supreme Court nomination last week. So contract tracers are going to have a long time trying to figure out who all the president was in contact with over the last week, and that was one question that his doctors today in their update didn't want to address.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. That's the CBC's Stephen D'Souza in New York. For more on Donald Trump's condition, we have invited CBC medical contributor Dr. Peter Lynn onto the program, and he joins us now from Toronto. So, Dr. Lynn, you saw quite a large team of doctors, of course. I suppose not surprising. He is the president of the United States. He's going to get the best treatment possible. But what did you hear in that update that gives you some insight into what's going on with Donald Trump's health and treatment?
The most important thing is that he's not on oxygen, so that's a good sign. And number two was that the fever was gone, because that's what we're going to track. If the fever is gone, it means that the body is no longer fighting this infection, and we're hoping that that means that all the things that he got was clearing it. So either his own body was clearing the virus, or the two medications that they got was helping the president to clear out the virus. And so therefore, the fever being gone and the fact that he's walking around, no need for oxygen, that's a very different scenario than we were facing with Prime Minister of Britain. You know, when he was sick, he was at home, he was tweeting out to people, and then all of a sudden he turned worse, and then he had to go to hospital and get oxygen in that situation. So this one actually looks much better because the fever is gone, no oxygen. The next day or so, we'll see the direction. Is that something that's going to maintain itself?
Right. But I mean, is COVID, from what we know about it so far, is there any kind of an up and down progress with it? Or is the fact that they're saying the president is already improving mean that he's definitely on the road to recovery?
No, there's no definites, but remember they gave him lots of medication, right? So the two medications that they mentioned, along with a whole bunch of other things that he was taking, one was the antibody from Regeneron. So there's two antibodies. So instead of waiting for the president to make his own antibodies in his body, or to give him plasma from other people, in other words, blood that has antibodies that were made by other people that went through an infection, companies are now making this antibody, and so therefore they're testing it. Can we give it in this situation so that the virus is never allowed to set up shop? So perhaps his mild, short fever, maybe that the virus was there, then the antibodies goes in and takes it out. That's the hope. The other drug that he was taking on was remdesivir, and remdesivir basically goes into the cell and stops the photocopy system. So the virus has to enter your cells, and then it borrows our photocopy system to make copies of itself. And so remdesivir goes in there and blocks that system, so it makes sure that the virus can't photocopy itself. So all of these things are really trying to decrease the number of viruses that may be able to grow inside his body, so that way he can fight it off. And hopefully that sign of less fever or no fever for the last 24 hours is a sign that those things may be working.
I'm curious what other conclusions or insights you might have observed as you watched that update. There were several different doctors who spoke and gave different perspectives on the president's condition. Was there anything else that struck you as interesting or new?
Yeah, large, huge number of people, and that's because this virus can go to different organs. So we've seen people getting very sick in terms of hearts, in terms of kidneys, in terms of blood clots and strokes. So that's why there's this huge team that's sitting there monitoring all of those things. The first spot that this virus will go to is the lungs, because you breathe it in. And so therefore, that's why they keep an eye on the saturation, you know, that little finger thing that they keep an eye on how much oxygen is in there. Because once the lung cells are damaged, then you can't move oxygen across into your blood. So they're monitoring that. They mentioned that the kidneys were fine, the liver was fine, and the heart was fine, because they're monitoring all of those things. Could the virus spread out? Now, the hope is that with all this sort of quick action with these experimental drugs, now I say experimental drugs, they have been used on other people, but it hasn't been proven to be useful yet. So with those experimental drugs, we're hoping that the viral counts will go down. The next step that they didn't report is nasal swabs. So they have to keep testing him to make sure that these swabs are now going to start coming back as negative, meaning that there's no virus sitting within his nose area either. And that would be the final sign that he has cleared this particular virus.
And now the doctors were asked several times and in several different ways whether the president had been on supplemental oxygen. He didn't seem to want to answer whether he'd ever been on it. He just kept saying he's not on it right now. He was not on it Thursday. It was a little bit of a dance going on there. But how important is this information for what we know about this disease?
Yeah, the moment somebody needs supplemental oxygen, a couple of things comes to mind. Number one is that the virus has now entered into the lung cells. We've noticed that this virus, it's the same virus, yet one person no symptoms at all, one person just very mild symptoms, another one severe symptoms, another one ventilator where they need a machine to help them breathe, and then some die. So it's like this huge spectrum. And so it's not the virus that's different, it's how our body is set up. And so that's why they keep an eye on his lung function. If he needs oxygen, it means the virus has entered into his lung cells, and the reaction there is a bad thing. In other words, the cells are getting killed, and that's why he'll need supplemental oxygen. And once you're on supplemental oxygen, your risk of dying or going onto ventilator obviously is higher, because now we have the first sign that the lung is involved. So that's why they're going to keep a very close eye on that. And as soon as he needs oxygen, that's a sign that his body is one of those systems that will be set up in a bad way. He's going to get the bad version of COVID. And because of his age and because of his weight, and also because he's a male, those are things that seems to push us into a higher risk situation. And that's probably why they're taking all these steps. And also in the hospital, they have access to chest x-rays, CT scans, so they can actually look and see if there's any damage there even before he feels symptoms. And of course, if he needs oxygen or ventilation, that would be the fastest place. He'd be there already. And that's why these precautions were probably taken.
Right. Now, as you mentioned, his age and weight are concerns, but we know he doesn't drink or smoke, apparently. So this are good factors in the president's prognosis, I would presume. But it's still very, very early. Of course, just 72 hours, the doctor mentioned, since the diagnosis. What are they going to be watching now in the days ahead, Dr. Lin?
Yeah, so two things. One is his energy. So as long as he continues to be able to walk around and sort of be feisty, and I'm hoping to see lots of tweets from him, because that would be a sign that he's doing well. And then the oxygen levels is going to be something they're monitoring. They will continue to monitor his kidney function and his heart function, but I think that part is going to be okay. The most important one now is, does his lungs begin to deteriorate? And also those swabs, because they're going to continue to swab him until he goes negative. And as soon as we hear that there's a negative swab, that means that he's cleared the virus out of his system. Having said that, these swabs aren't perfect either. You know, they're about 30% of the time. If you don't get it high enough, you might not get a good sample, but I'm pretty sure they're going to do a good job there. I'm hoping they're going to review the tapes of that Rose Garden event, because that tape is actually very useful for us in the medical world, because they have a picture of what everybody did that day, like where they were sitting close to each other without masks, were they hugging each other, were they talking to each other. So from that one video, we could probably figure out how this virus is moving in a large crowd. Because normally at a party, we don't have surveillance cameras, but in this case, we have everybody's names, they're all going to be tested, and we'll know who is positive and who spread what to whom. And so therefore, that one video may tell us how close do you have to be and so on and so forth in order to get this virus. And that will help us decide, how do we open up our restaurants safely and how do we open up our public spaces safely? Because that information is almost like a study by itself, because it's all controlled, right? Because everybody is there and we'll have the information on who's positive and who is not. So hopefully this will teach us quite a lot. And I'm hoping that the president will have a very mild course and then be back to normal very shortly.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin.
Thank you.
Dr. Peter Lin joined us from Toronto.